The Sony ZV-E10 Mark II has been out for a few months now, and even though the initial reviews were pretty positive, the camera doesn't seem to have exploded in popularity like its predecessor, the Mark I. So I've had the Mark II since its release and I have been using it heavily alongside the Mark I. But is it worth the upgrade? Let's find out. So let's start with the similarities, because to look at, these cameras are almost identical. The Mark II is marginally larger in all aspects, with the biggest physical difference really just being that larger grip. The button layout between the two cameras is very similar, with the only differences being the power button has been moved next to the shutter button, and the mode selector has been changed from a button to a switch. This is a nice change, especially as cycling through the shoot modes was very slow with the Mark I, so this is a big improvement. Everything else though is very similar layout wise. There's still no EVF electronic viewfinder, and the screen still flips around to the side. Okay, so what are the main differences where the Mark II has upgraded from the Mark I? Well, the big one is the new and improved sensor. The Mark II has a 26 megapixel BSI CMOS sensor. This has a maximum picture size of 6192 by 4128 pixels and can record 4K video at up to 60 frames per second and Full HD video at 120 frames per second. Compared on the Mark I to its 24 megapixel sensor, which was a CMOS sensor with a maximum resolution of 6000 by 4000 pixels. So as a summary, the Mark II has a better sensor which has 8% more pixels for larger and more detailed images. So if that's your absolute top priority, then the Mark II certainly has better resolution. Another big improvement is the autofocus. The Mark II has an increased number of autofocus points, 759 versus the 425 in the Mark I. These extra 334 focus points make autofocusing quicker and more accurate. Again, a very worthwhile update. But what about the video quality? The ZV-E10 Mark II has made some improvements in video recording, now being able to shoot video up to 4K 60 frames per second at 10-bit. You can also shoot in 4K in the Mark I, but only at 30 frames per second video, and that is limited to 8-bit colour. Essentially, this means the ZV-E10 Mark II can capture 64 times the colour information than the original. So overall, the Mark II can capture more colour-rich images. So again, similar to the images, a higher bitrate for better video quality with the Mark II. A huge quality of life improvement between the two versions is the upgrade of the internal menus. The new menus have more touchscreen capabilities, more options on the screen, and an upgraded menu structure. Now, whilst this seems very different to begin with, it is much more organised and easier to navigate than the Mark I. Also, the auto vertical format when changing orientation of the camera is a nice little feature. Another big improvement here is that Sony has improved the battery life between the two cameras. And this is because the Mark II uses the larger MP-FZ100 battery compared to the MP-FW50 battery in the Mark I. This makes a big difference between the battery life between the two. The Mark I can record for up to 1 hour and 20 minutes usually before running out of battery, then 4K, whereas the ZV-E10 Mark II you can get around 2 hours 20. This is a big boost in battery life and sufficient for most shooting sessions. Plus, you can also run it off USB-C power if required. Though, saying that, although the Mark II can shoot for a longer time, it does unfortunately suffer from overheating. The old enemy is back again. It's a major concern because when shooting at 4K 60 frames per second at 10-bit 422 at 200 megabits per second, the camera overheats in around 20-25 minutes. Which really isn't great. This can disrupt shooting sessions very quickly as this necessitates needing to take a break to cool the camera down. It's worth noting when shooting at a lower quality of 50 megabits per second, the camera shouldn't overheat at all. I didn't really have many overheating issues with the Mark I. The longest I recorded for was around 2 hours at 4K 30 frames per second, and the camera didn't overheat. So worth bearing in mind if you're planning on using the highest quality video recording with the Mark II all the time, that you are likely to see the camera overheating. If you are going to be happier using it at that lower bitrate, which, the quality still looks pretty good, then it's less of an issue. So what's the main thing I've not mentioned? Well, of course, it's the price. We've gone through the main differences in the camera, but does that justify the difference in the price? And to be honest, I think this is where the Mark II has been as popular as it possibly could have. Now, the Mark I, brand new, still costs $700, whereas the Mark II is a whopping $1,100, $400 difference. Now, it's worth noting that I've included the 16 to 50mm kit lens in these prices. You can get them both cheaper in body-only mode, and that the Mark II camera does have an updated version of this lens. Now, I have done a full comparison of the Mark I versus Mark II lens on this channel, but spoiler alert, there isn't much difference. So, bearing all that in mind, should you upgrade? And unfortunately, the price probably is going to be the defining factor of whether you should upgrade or not, as the other improvements are indeed nice, but they're not revolutionary in a way to justify that increased price tag. Of course, if you're coming from an older camera, such as the A6000 or A5100, then either will seem like a massive improvement. And where I would go for the Mark II is if you have the budget and really want that best quality image performance. But if not, the Mark I is still a fine choice and is a long way off being out of date.